Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about recording artists, those that made records and those that we wish had. It is kind of amazing when you think about it. All of the people who have recorded. Let's go back just to the earliest days of recording, when it was such a novelty, when it was such an amazing thing, and a lot of people recorded their voice, Gladstone and P.T. Barnum, lots of others. And the thing is that there's a wish list one might have of people who should have recorded but didn't. But we have to remember something else, that the phonograph was invented in 1877. It was somewhat born prematurely because it really couldn't do anything except be a novelty and a little bit of a parlor trick. Not much more than that. You couldn't have a permanent recording. It wasn't until the work of the Bell Tainter team and later the Edison improvement in which you finally had viable recordings starting around 1888 in which you could record people. Now, there were some recordings made of people that just don't exist anymore, which is a pity. Julia Grant was recorded, the widow of General Grant, but that record is long gone. There are lots of other people who recorded on cylinder whose records do not exist anymore. Perhaps one of the most notable examples is Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. He made some moments on Bettini cylinders. He did try dictating onto cylinder and discovered he hated it. All the records were destroyed. There is not an existent recording of Mark Twain. There is not an existent recording of William McKinley. No matter what I hear about William McKinley making records, and of course there was a whole series of William McKinley's last speeches, those are not William McKinley. There was a recording of Benjamin Harrison made on a Bettini cylinder. There was, of course, recordings of Theodore Roosevelt. It's interesting to note when Theodore Roosevelt made recordings, the recording engineer said, "Is there anything you'd like to leave for posterity? Like a message or whatever." And Roosevelt's answer was, "I don't give a damn about posterity." That was Theodore Roosevelt. It was all about Theodore Roosevelt. That pretty well solves that. All of the other presidents recorded. The interesting thing about Mark Twain, though, getting back to that, is that there is a performer that's made a life study of Mark Twain. His name is Hal Holbrook. He's must be in his 90s at this point. And I remember when I was a kid listening to the LP records of him playing Mark Twain when he talked like that. He said in the liner notes in the back of the LP that he learned to speak like Mark Twain by listening to recordings of Twain's voice. Now, there are no recordings of Mark Twain's voice. Therefore, we have a little bit of little bit of information there that isn't exactly true on the part of Hal Holbrook. So I always like to say it this way, that Mark Twain sounded exactly like Hal Holbrook. And I guess we'll leave it there. Think of the other people that could have made recordings, that should have made recordings. I know there's recordings of Chauncey Depew. He made recordings for Berliner. Even lived long enough to make a Vitaphone film, a talking picture. He was an individual who sat and talked with Lincoln, was a very big operator in the Republican Party. Think of others that were around. Look at John Hay. John Hay was Abraham Lincoln's one of his private secretaries. He was also Secretary of State under William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. Think of some of the great actors, some of the great performers, some of the great speakers, even some of the great singers who never made recordings. Just fun to think of who could have made records. And so every now and then, when a cache of old records are found in a warehouse or in a private collection, which I'm sure some exist, there's always those people who will come out and with the dreams and say, maybe here is that special record. Well, so far, we haven't found any recordings of Mark Twain. There are no recordings of William McKinley. I don't care about what they say at various sound archives. There are no recordings of William McKinley. And of course, there are no recordings of Grover Cleveland. Unfortunately, even though you'll see on the internet recordings of Grover Cleveland, it isn't. The other thing is this. Someday, perhaps, maybe somewhere we'll find some recordings. Maybe we'll discover some recordings. You know, it's amazing to hear the sounds of voices long gone. It's amazing to hear the voices of those who have long since left. You know, listen to a Tamano recording. I mean, he died in 1905. Listen to a recording of Joseph Jefferson. He died in 1905 too. And we had the opportunity to recall John Hay. He lived till 1905 as well. I am sure there must be recordings of Robert Lincoln, although I have never seen one or heard one. I'm sure there must be recordings of other individuals of note, maybe some great artists, some great poets from the past. I know there's the Walt Whitman cylinder, which I think is a fake. I don't think that's real. Because you got to remember, by the time recording became feasible, he was a very sick man, had a lot of trouble breathing, and a very hard time making a loud noise. And of course, to make a cylinder recording requires a lot of vocal effort. I have made an awful lot of cylinder recordings. I have recorded lots of people. So I know the process. I realize how difficult it can be. You cannot capture the soft tones, the subtle tones. You kind of need a very strong directional voice. And I find that the Walt Whitman cylinder is just a little too clear, a little too powerful, almost a little too amplified. The other thing is the Harry Houdini recording. I kind of have issues with that as well, but I can't say yes or no in its true existence. There's a lot of recordings that have been made that are of question, but there are some fantastic recordings that exist, of which we're very, very lucky. We can hear the voices of a lot of great people, but there is always that wish list of all the people that could have and never did. So we can only guess what they sounded like. Or you could almost dream and wish that the phonograph had been invented earlier. You know, I can read you the words of Abraham Lincoln. I can think of Abraham Lincoln, but I cannot understand how he sounded. I have no sense for that because we don't have it. We don't know what he sounded like. And unfortunately, that part is lost. The wish list can go on and on and on. And I'm sure many of you, those perhaps listening to this, are sitting there saying, yeah, there's a lot of people I wish had recorded. But I guess what we have to be is thankful for what we have. And maybe, just maybe, recordings may be found in the future that do exist of the people we think don't exist. It's well worth thinking about and always worth wishing for.